All right, everyone. So, I think this is a good time to start. So I'd like to welcome you to the Find Your Purpose Using Science presentation. And all of you had the chance to take a look at the event and the things that I suggested you take a look at before we engage in this discussion. So I'll do a brief recap of the book and the points I made there, very brief, few minutes, and then we'll engage in discussion. And the discussion, for the discussion, what I'd like you to do is, if you have a question, you can either ask directly, following naturally the course of the conversation, or you can type it into the chat screen, and I'll address the question that way. So we'll see how it goes. This is the first of these events, so I don't know. I just don't want folks talking over each other. So just letting you know that I'll be moderating the discussion that way. All right, so super brief recap. Find Your Purpose Using Science, the book I wrote, is informed by literature on meaning and purpose, research in psychology, medicine, and cognitive neuroscience. And so I am a scholar of meaning and purpose, and I particularly look at meaning and purpose in the Soviet Union. So that's a particular interest of mine, of meaning and purpose in the Soviet Union. By the way, can everyone hear me? Just want to confirm. Suddenly lost sound in my...
Wait, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you. Good. So
your pitch is out unless you turned it off. The pitch is out.
Okay, great. So as long as folks can hear me, great. Okay, so the book describes the literature on meaning and purpose. And as I mentioned, I'm a scholar of meaning and purpose. I study meaning and purpose, both the broad literature on it, and my primary source research is on meaning and purpose in non-Western settings, particularly secular settings, settings that are not traditionally presumed to have sense of meaning and purpose because they're not associated with religion. Religion is what in the United States and most countries is associated with meaning and purpose. So I specifically looked at the Soviet Union to see how people in a different yet very modern, in a way, society found a sense of meaning and purpose. But the book doesn't really talk about that. The book talks about the scholarship on meaning and purpose and how people find meaning and purpose. And there are four broad strategies described in the book. The first is to figure out your long-term goals. This is because meaning and purpose, the definition of meaning and purpose, is the overarching drive, the overarching motivation that draws you to do whatever you do in life. That's the definition of meaning and purpose in life. So that's what we're orienting toward when we're trying to find meaning and purpose. So it's important to figure out your long-term goals, whatever your long-term goals are. And the book goes through it, we can have a discussion about it. So that's one strategy, to figure out your long-term aspirations and goals. Another strategy is self-reflection. There's a lot of research showing that self-reflection on one's sense of meaning and purpose is a very important way of finding a deeper and richer sense of personal meaning and purpose. And I go through a set of exercises in the book to help folks do that. I also help folks do that regarding finding their goals. The third element of finding meaning and purpose, a strong personal sense of meaning and purpose, is community. So having strong community bonds, social bonds, very valuable for finding a rich sense of meaning and purpose. And finally, last but not least, serving others, serving something bigger than yourself, something outside of yourself, serving other people in some way. Volunteering, donating is really important for finding a sense of meaning and purpose. And this sense of meaning and purpose is not something minor, it's not kind of something abstract. There's a lot of research showing that a rich sense of meaning and purpose is really important for one's mental health and physical health. Both of those things. You get less sick physically, and you're much quicker, you're better able to recover from illnesses physically with a stronger and richer sense of meaning and purpose. And you have better mental health. So you feel better, you're less vulnerable to various forms of mental illness, and that's really valuable as well, of course. So it really pays to have a rich sense of meaning and purpose. It's very important. And that's what the book is about. Find Your Purpose Using Science. It's available on Amazon, and the folks on this call have read either the book or content from the book. There's a questionnaire which I made available to the folks here, and who future listeners can check out at findyourpurpose.online, where you can actually measure and track your sense of meaning and purpose over time. So that's something useful as well. So that's a super brief recap I wanted to do, and this is the first of these discussions of Intentional Insights content by virtual presentation. So I wanted to open up the floor to folks who are on the call and see what kind of questions they have and what directions they want to lead it into. So, would anybody like to start their first question or comment that they would like me to respond?
Yeah, no, well, hello, I'm Christopher, and I actually took that questionnaire earlier today. And I was wondering how you came up with the process for asking those particular questions.
Yes. So the questionnaire is a psychometric questionnaire. It's for people who are watching this and know this terminology. Psychometric refers to a science-based questionnaire, and it's a Likert questionnaire, which means that it has ratings from a number of ratings in which you can rate yourself for each quantity. And there are 10 questions which get at various aspects of meaning and purpose. So the questionnaire itself, I came up with it based on the evidence of what's important for a sense of meaning and purpose. So I just described to you the 4 components that are important for a sense of meaning and purpose, and the questions are all aimed to get at those components in some way, shape, or form. So, for example, there are questions about this broad, overarching sense of meaning and purpose, which more relates to your goals and how you feel about those, your long-term goals and aspirations. There are questions about self-reflection. How well do you do on self-reflection? There are questions about serving others. How well do you do around that? And there are questions around community and social bonds and what happens for you there. So the purpose of having these sorts of diverse questions is that you can actually evaluate which of these you might be strong on and which of these might need improvement. So then you can specifically target that specific area with exercises that I described in the book that can help you improve in that specific area. Or ones you can come up with yourself, It's not hard to imagine. It's probably harder to imagine without the exercises in the book having things around self-reflection, but having community and social bonds. I do list a number of exercises in the book which are helpful, but you can also find them yourself in going out and doing some charity donations, volunteering, and reflecting on how that increases your sense of meaning and purpose. So yeah, that's the essence of how I came up with the questions. And then they have a 10-point scale for each of them to rate how you feel about yourself. So it's a self-rated questionnaire. And that gives you the benefit of having a baseline. Once you start with a baseline of meaning and purpose, then you can see how various interventions that you engage in, impact your sense of meaning and purpose over time. Does that get at the question, Christopher?
Oh yeah, it did. I mean, even though it's a short questionnaire, it actually was very useful to me.
Wonderful. I'm very pleased to hear that. Cool. So again, for folks who are watching this, findyourpurpose.online is where you can find that question. All right. Others? So let me then go by turn. to the folks who are present. Let's see. Edward, do you have any questions that you wanted to ask me? Edward, if you don't have a microphone and you're typing something, just nod right now. Okay, so if you are typing something, nod. Great. Cool. We'll wait for Edward to type in his questionnaire, and then we can, in the meantime, go to Chris. Chris, do you have any questions that you would like to ask about meaning and purpose? Chris Johnson, any questions? I'm not sure he has any questions, or maybe his microphone is not working either. Let's see. Jill, any questions from you?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
For questions, I guess. Is this, I guess, first is how your meaning scale compares with the other meaning scales out there.
Other meaning and purpose scales?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's the.
Can you hear me? Hello?
From user questions, from user, how do I phrase this well? It's kind of bottom-up generated. I don't want to go into the technicalities too much, but basically it looks at what people, when it asks people who experience high sense of meaning and purpose, then it sees what kind of things they experience, are qualities about those people, and then it has a questionnaire that's based on the qualities of those people. So that's one approach to doing it. So the challenge with that approach is that, or the reason I chose not to include that questionnaire, not that I think it's a bad approach at all, it's just incomplete in that people often don't know themselves what gives them a sense of meaning and purpose. You know, research clearly shows that having a sense of long-term goals, self-reflection, community bonds, and serving others gives people a sense of meaning and purpose, but people don't intuitively know that. So they would not generate these questions by themselves. They would not generate these qualities by themselves. And so my approach is one that's more informed by the research as opposed to informed by what people themselves experience and describe as related to a sense of meaning and purpose. So that's why I prefer my questionnaire to, as it really helps inform people who don't know what they might be missing, what they should actually be working on.
Okay. And I guess the second question is,
Sure.
Can you speak a bit more about your approach to studying meaning and purpose in the Soviet Union, particularly, did you have the wisdom research done on the difference between Americans and Russians or Soviet Union?
Sure. Happy to talk about that. So I looked at the Soviet Union in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. So that was the period when I focused on the Soviet Union. The post-World War II period from 1940, but 1945 to 1968. And if anyone wants to take a look at my academic book on that topic, it came out with the University of Pittsburgh Press. It's called Socialist Fun, Youth Consumption and Popular Culture, State-Sponsored Popular Culture from 1945 to 1970, I think. I told it. So it's recently out. And my publisher will be happy that I mentioned it. So yes, so I talk in that in a lot of depth about my research. If anyone wants depth here, I'll cover it very shallowly. So what I basically did is I went to the Soviet Union, the former Soviet Union, now Russia. So I went specifically to Russia, not to the 13 other republics of the former Soviet Union. So I focused on Russia itself. I went to Moscow, which is the capital and used to be the capital of the Soviet Union, and Saratov, which is a major regional city in the Soviet Union, sort of like where I live right now, Columbus, Ohio. You compare that to any large Midwestern city, not of the size of Chicago, but something like Columbus, if you have the comparison. So then what I did there is I looked at archives, which contained government records, government policies, reports of various sorts. I looked at newspaper articles. I looked at official speeches and policies. And I had interviews with former Soviet citizens on a whole lot of topics. So that's the kind of documentation, that's the kind of evidence that I looked at. And what I looked for was how Soviet citizens gained a sense of meaning and purpose. Why did I look for it? Why did they even think that Soviet citizens had a sense of meaning and purpose? Well, for any society to function, it has to give its citizens a sense of meaning and purpose somehow. Because without a rich sense of meaning and purpose, there's quite a bit of evidence showing that people would be really mentally ill, physically ill. It's bad. You don't want to have a poor sense of meaning and purpose. So if you don't have a rich sense of meaning and purpose, that's something to work on. And for any society to function, it needs to satisfy certain basic social desires, social needs. Sense of meaning and purpose is one of these needs. So I looked at what are the things associated with a sense of meaning and purpose. You have communities, you have serving others, you have self-reflection, and you have long-term goals. So I looked at how the Soviet Union found ways for its citizens to acquire those things if they're not acquired in a religious setting. Because in the United States, these things are mainly acquired in a religious setting. Community bonds, serving others, self-reflection, kind of long-term goals, very strongly associated with religious settings. Not always, but in the large majority of cases. And so what I found is that the Soviet Union had community centers, which it called clubs. In Russian, if anyone is curious, it's called kluby or kulturny center, cultural centers. And these clubs provided citizens with an opportunity for a whole variety of activities conducive to people finding their long-term goals, serving others, having community, and self-reflection. These included things like musical groups. So people in musical groups who were amateur musicians, they told me in interviews how they had a strong sense of serving others through playing their music. They spent countless hours. So the government sponsored these clubs. They had free musical instruments. They had free audio, whatever, rooms, whatnot, places to congregate. Stuff that would cost a lot of money here in the United States. That's not available, obviously not government sponsored. You have some of that in churches, musical groups, choirs, and so on, and which provide people with a strong sense of meaning and purpose. Otherwise, it has to be people who are wealthy enough to purchase guitars and so on, and have spaces for these things. In the Soviet Union, the government provided this. So people came together in these clubs, and they learned how to play music, and then they played music for audiences. And then the government sent them to tours of factories and farms around the country, and they had this real sense of service, of being really to service, and they kind of described how they were, told me, how they were so happy to be able to serve and to provide music to the people, and how at the same time these clubs, these musical groups within clubs, they served for the members as a sense of strong community bonds. They made close friendships that they retained throughout their lives. Sometimes they didn't. But at the time, it served as a strong sense of provision of meaning and purpose for folks who were in those groups. The clubs, not the musical groups, the clubs also had venues for self-reflection and finding long-term goals. These were discussion groups, study groups around various topics, and discussion groups, book clubs, debates, where people could debate on topics of ethics, morals, values, and just various aspects of ideological things, values things, where they got to reflect on these things and think about themselves and figure out their long-term aspirations. So that is a fundamental way that the Soviet Union provided its citizens with a sense of meaning and purpose. It's not the only venue. So clubs and civic centers are certainly not the only venue, but it's a major venue. And probably the main venue, I would say, based on my evaluation of the evidence, that's why I chose to focus on them. And there are plenty of other activities that took place in clubs, like sports activities and volunteering activities where people cleaned up the streets, construction brigades where people voluntarily constructed buildings, and so on. So that's the kind of things the Soviet Union did to provide meaning and purpose for its citizens, and other things as well. Does that clarify the question?
Yeah, so I'm curious if you had any insights from that that informed your work now in America.
Absolutely. So it helped me confirm, because I was studying this culture, the society, that there's nothing inherently unique about religious institutions that provides people with a source of meaning and purpose. In other words, it's just about certain characteristics that religious institutions have, that they provide people with that overarching sense of long-term goals and aspirations. It provides them with a sense of self-reflection. It provides them with community bonds and opportunities to serve others. And what I'm trying to do is, through this book, Find Your Purpose Using Science, communicate this information to folks, that there's nothing magical or unique about finding your rich and sense of meaning and purpose. I'm trying to communicate that it's really important to do so for your physical health and mental health, and that there are ways to do so through the 4 things I outlined. Now, you can get those things in religious institutions, absolutely. You can also get it in secular institutions. So, you can have civic clubs where you get to serve others, where you have community bonds. And in civic clubs, it's a little bit harder to self-reflect and figure out your long-term goals, but there are communities that help you do so. And you can do so by yourself using the exercises provided in the book and other exercises. Mm-hmm. So Intentional Insights website is a good venue for these sorts of exercises and education about how to self-reflect, figure out your long-term goals, and so on. And it's at the same time, it's important to serve others. And there's a strong movement called Effective Altruism, which you can check out, effectivealtruism.org, which is dedicated to figuring out the most impactful ways of serving others to make the biggest impact on the world. And of course, finding community is something that's quite important to do. And it's in-person community is best if you can take it, if you can get it. Online community will do if your current conditions inhibit you from finding in-person community. I remember how when I was in Russia for my 9-month stay to do research in the archives, it was quite hard to find community. Being an expat I grew up in the United States. My family immigrated from the former Soviet Union when I was 10, so I'm Americanized, I'm a citizen, and it was really hard to find community there. So I found virtual community through talking to my wife, Agnes, on the phone, and talking to my friends online, and sometimes hanging out with other expats in Moscow. Expat is a term for expatriate, for people who are not from the United States, who are in Russia and are in Moscow. So those are communities I found, but it was really difficult. So I totally understand when people say, when people hear this presentation, they tell me, oh, it's hard to find community in person. I'm in a place X, it's hard to find people around me. Virtual community will do, although in-person community is best.
Have you tried to sync up your research, or have you given any thought to the different goals observation about Americans and the long-standing kind of sense of lack of purpose meaning in young people, particularly in America, as opposed to the
Absolutely. So that's what I'm trying to target with my book. There is definitely a sense among many Americans of a lack of meaning and purpose, and I see it as very troubling and very negatively impactful for people's physical and mental health. People are sick, people are dying because they don't have good enough sense of meaning and purpose, and my book is trying to address that. And I give people recommendations and exercises that they can do to improve that. So my book itself is a therapeutic intervention. Now, I'm not a therapist, and I don't actually engage in therapy, but it's a therapeutic intervention in the sense that it has exercises informed by cognitive behavioral therapy, which is the most research-based therapy that we have, of how to guide yourself into helping gain a sense of meaning and purpose. And there are a number of therapists who actually recommend my book to their clients or using outside of therapy sessions.
So do you, beyond identifying or understanding the problem, do you have any instinct or intuition around what is it about American culture that makes us more susceptible to lack of meaning and purpose, or is that outside the scope of what we're attempting to do?
Let's see. So I don't have enough evidence to say that Americans are particularly lacking in a sense of meaning and purpose compared to people in other groups, in other countries, because we don't have strong studies to indicate that. So I wouldn't say, I wouldn't make that kind of, sort of statement. I don't know. It would be great if people in a lot of countries took the questionnaire, and then we can actually compare people who, their sense of meaning and purpose compared to Americans. So that would be one way of actually getting at this information. But we currently don't have that information. If, and right now I'm speculating only, so from a perspective of speculation, my guess is that the individualism prevalent in American culture undermines the sense of community belonging that is present in many other cultures which are less individualist. So that's just a quality of American culture. And my guess is that it would weakly correlate with a lower sense of meaning and purpose, but I don't have enough information to talk about that, and that was just a very speculative statement, which I'm making clear is all right. Edward came out with a question, so I'll read his statements for those folks who are unable to see it because of the Google Hangout format. So quoting Edward, not a question, but I thought I'd make a comment. I thought I'd try to draw some distinctions between terminal values. I'm a preference utilitarian, not a hedonistic utilitarian. So I'd rather, which he explains, optimize for outcomes than for feeling of meaningfulness. For example, I'd rather make an impact on the course of civilization and never know than think I'd made a big impact when I hadn't. Perhaps the two goals converge frequently, but it's not always the case. So perhaps others aren't motivated to seek out similar meaning and purpose for similar reasons. This would certainly explain people without a desire to leave Plato's cave, which seems to be the default. Perhaps people without a sense of meaning and purpose don't have a desire for it. This would hint that this desire is the bottleneck, not access to specific methods, tools, and scientific information. Oh, thank you for sharing it, Edward. So when I talk to people about a sense of meaning and purpose, I notice that once I start talking about the fact that meaning and purpose are really important for physical and mental health, they update their beliefs about their desire to have a sense of meaning and purpose. So even for a preference utilitarian, meaning that you'd like to make a positive outcome on the world and not even know it, rather than make a big outcome and think you make an outcome and not, so have good feelings about making an outcome, making a positive impact. It's in the short and medium term, in order to make a positive impact on the world, it's important to have good physical health and mental health. So from that perspective, it pays off to work on one's sense of meaning and purpose and make sure to be in a good position with one's sense of meaning and purpose. I remember that, kind of making this realization when I started reading the literature, getting into the research on meaning and purpose. And that's when I started to really work hard on improving my own sense of meaning and purpose in a way that was kind of like it wasn't so pressing for me previously. Like I felt, bad about not having a sense of meaning and purpose early on in my life, and that's what pushed me to be interested in this topic. And I kind of felt that empty feeling in the midst of my stomach, kind of like that comes from that angst about not having a sense of meaning and purpose. So that drew me to the research on meaning and purpose as one of the questions I was researching. Other questions I research includes emotions, decision making, cognitive biases, stuff like that. So I could have chosen, I do research other stuff as well. Now, one of the cognitive biases that human beings have is called hyperbolic discount, which is a preference for short-term rewards over bigger, longer-term rewards. And that's a thing that prevents us from doing things that are beneficial for us in the long run, but are in the short run. So working on finding one's sense of meaning and purpose and is not really so fun in the short run. It requires introspection, answering some hard questions, sitting down and actually thinking about it, writing things down, and it's not an easy thing. But from the perspective of having better mental and physical health, there is really little doubt that it will really pay off in the long term. So, for example, research on meaning and purpose has shown that having a stronger sense of meaning and purpose results in less strokes and heart disease, which are leading causes of death in the United States. It results in less stomach ailments, less Alzheimer's, greater longevity, so people have longer lives, you have longer time to make a positive impact. People feel better on an everyday level. They have lower levels of the hormone cortisol, which is associated with stress. That's the main stress hormone, and it really negatively impacts various aspects of our body. It impacts our ability to think negatively. It harms, literally destroys neurons. If you're producing lots of cortisol, your neurons, your brain cells are getting destroyed or not made at such a rapid rate. So essentially you have less neurons as a result of cortisol. And lots of other negative things which you can look up. So the same thing goes for mental health. You have lower sense of motivation, which impacts your ability to do anything in life, your motivation. You have a lower level of life satisfaction, just general good feelings in life. And you have a lower level of happiness, more likely to develop depression, anxiety, a whole bunch of various other mental health problems. So from the sense of the long term, like if you have a crisis right now, if you are like dealing with, some bad thing right now, there's sure, focus on that. But from the long-term perspective, you will be so much better off to be in doing whatever you want to accomplish in the world if you have a strong sense of meaning and purpose. That there's little doubt that a calculated approach would result in you focusing much more on meaning and purpose if you don't have a strong sense of meaning and purpose yet. So that's what the research suggests. Cool. I want to go to Barry because he recently joined, and I want to see if he has any questions to ask about meaning and purpose. Okay, doesn't look like any questions from Barry. Let's see. Chris, I don't think you said you don't have questions, and I think your microphone's not working. But if you have questions, oh, you do have a question. Curious. So Chris's microphone's not working, which is why I'm reading his question. So he asks, I'm curious about the kind of self-reflection activities that took place in Soviet clubs. How discussion groups were structured, what topics were discussed, curricula used, etc. Does my book, Socialist Fund, go into detail on those topics? Yep, it goes in detail into those topics. So topics included things like friendship. What does it mean to have friendship? What is the value of topics like love, topics like caring, various truth, impacting the world positively, science, all sorts of things that you would associate with fundamental ethics and morality, as well as questions around socialist ideology. So those were also part of the discussion. So all sorts, and you asked about how they were structured. Discussion groups were structured in a variety of formats. So you had long-term study groups that studied books on a number of topics that had various curricula that were prepared by the state or self-generated, prepared by official educators who were paid by the state, or self-generated depending on the club and the topic. They had one-off events such as big debates around a specific topic, a whole variety of things that were available. So I think that gets into the question, that gets at your question, but please type more stuff if you would like to know more things. Let's see, I want to go to Jill because I know she had to go soon. She has to go soon, and see if Jill has any more questions.
Thank you for that. I think that was a good introduction and really helps me understand how you're approaching this, and it was a good overview, so
cool. Excellent. I'm happy that was helpful. And I know, Jill, do you want to share a little bit about what you're working on so that folks who are watching this would know and see how there are overlaps between what Intentional Insights does and what Inquire does?
Sure. So Inquire is ultimately asking the question of how can we build tools that make sense of their lives faster, which is kind of the cognitive aspect to we're positing kind of a working hypothesis, which we're backing up with as much data as we can find on it. We're convinced that it's a necessary condition for emergent meaning and purpose. So you can't make sense of your life, which is really tied to natural intelligence, and just be able to really just assemble a working model of the world around you. You won't converge on meaning and purpose. So it's kind of a precondition, and then remains to be seen if more just emerges from that process. Kind of to your point, is there even a deeper level rudimentary sense of meaning and purpose? It just comes from really feeling connected to your direct environment and giving it so basically that's our tools and an interactive website to ideas around intelligence amplification, visualization, and artificial memory to try to accelerate and enhance that ability and even train that ability.
Cool, thank you. And it's inquire.com for those folks.
Sorry, not IO.
IO, my apologies.
I'll put it in the text box.
Yep. INQUIRE. for those who are curious. Yep. Okay. Thank you, Jill. All right. Does anybody else have any questions or thoughts? If
Yes.
somebody, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to ask, my battery's actually about to run out, but how does location impact purpose? Have you done any research particularly on that?
Clarify what you mean by location. Geographic
Like
location?
where you live and the kind of life you end up living, like how does that particularly have an impact on your purpose and stuff, and happiness in life and stuff?
Cool. Yes, so there has been some research done on this stuff, and specifically on religious people. So research on religious people shows that people who are religious will live in a country that is where people around them represent the same majority religion. So Christians in a Christian country, Muslims in a Muslim country have a stronger sense of meaning and purpose. People who are religious but live in a country that is not their majority country, so country, let's say Christians living in a Muslim country, those people tend to have a lower sense of meaning and purpose. So that's kind of one interesting finding. And that relates somewhat to the sense of community. There's less of a sense of broader community with the whole country. And these are sort of semi-speculative things about why these are, this is the case. But the research, again, this is not my research. This is me reporting on research that has been done. The authors suggest that one reason might be that they don't have such a strong sense of community with the rest of the country, not only their local community, but with the rest of the country, and that there's tensions between longer overarching goals and aspirations and the rest of the people in the country, so they don't all go into that sort of norm. Now, another aspect of research on religious people and location that's salient is that religious people who are located within communities of religious people, so people who go to a church, for example, Christians who go to a church, Jews who go to a synagogue, and so on, they have a stronger sense of meaning and purpose. Religious people who are located within a community, who are not located within a religious community, let's say a Jewish person who lives surrounded by Christians and doesn't have a synagogue, or there are some sects of Christianity where people worship by themselves and not in a community setting. So these people have a lower sense of meaning and purpose. And this is there's pretty solid evidence showing that is about community bonds, community belonging. So, and that's further evidence that it's not anything about religion itself which gives people a sense of meaning and purpose, but that the community aspect of religion helps people gain all of these things, long-term, the aspirations, long-term aspirations, reflection, community belonging, serving others, and so on. So that's some evidence that we have right there. That is research-based, what the research shows. So I can extrapolate from that evidence. So I'm extrapolating. I'm not extrapolating in a speculative manner. I'm extrapolating in a way that would show what researchers say has base validity. Base validity means this makes sense, clear sense based on the data, not like this is speculative and whatever. So using face validity sort of claim, I would say that if you live in a place that doesn't provide you with a way to get long-term aspirations, not that sense of community, that either in-person community or at least virtual community, that doesn't provide you with that aspiration, the long-term goals, with opportunities for self-reflection, with opportunities especially for community belonging, and opportunities for serving others, these are things that would be harmful to your sense of meaning and purpose. And again, the book goes through specific things. So Find Your Purpose Using Science, my book, available on Amazon, goes through specific steps that you can go through, that you can figure out to get a sense of meaning and purpose, even if you live in that source of venue. You know, I have people who usually tends to be secular people who live in rural places which tend to be very religious, who email me and tell me that they're really grateful for having read the book because it helped them enrich their sense of meaning and purpose, even though they live in a venue, in a place that's not conducive to them having that sense of meaning and purpose. You know, and they start engaging with intentional insights, and we have a virtual community of people who are able to provide them with virtual online support around rational thinking, including about meaning and purpose in life and other topics. So a number of people in the Intentional Insights Insiders Facebook group, for example, live in places where they have a really tough time finding other like-minded people, reason-oriented people. Not necessarily secular at all, just reason-oriented people. Intentional Insights has many religious people as part of it, including a couple of pastors who are actually members of the group and who write for us. So it's not anything like about inherently secular, it's just people who don't share their values around being reason-oriented. And I see that Jill has to go to another meeting, so thank you very much, Jill, for asking your questions and for sharing about Inquire.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Nice to meet everybody and look forward to future conversations.
Look forward to it as well. All right. So, Christopher, does that get at your question?
Yeah, no, it does. It does. I've been just thinking about that lately, where exactly to move. I mean, that's a separate conversation, but
sure.
It answered it well.
Thank you. Yeah, looking at the kind of community you can find is super important. Yeah, this is why I really like Columbus. It has it's very affordable, and for a city that's kind of in the Midwest, it has an unusually strong concentration of reason-oriented people here and organizations centered around reason. So, yeah, really good place.
Wow, yeah, I didn't know that.
Yep, we can chat about it personally afterward. All right. Any other questions that folks might have? You can, if anyone is trying to type something into their computer who doesn't have a working microphone, just type 1 and enter right now if you still have a question. And if you don't. So I'll wait for 10 seconds to see if anyone has any question, and if not, I'll bring this to an end, but I'll be happy to answer more questions if folks have more questions. All right, looks like no more questions. So thank you very much, everyone who participated. And this has been the first Intentional Insights Insiders group chat. And I'm really glad that we had this good discussion and a good exploration of this topic. Thank you very much, all. Have a good day.
Thanks, Gleb. Cheers.
Thank you.
Cheers.